Anja Schmidt stared at the golden wedge on her plate with undisguised contempt. After 4 days at Camp Alva, Alabama, the food had been surprisingly abundant, more than she had eaten in the final months of the war, but this particular item offended her sensibilities as a trained baker from Berlin. "What is this yellow bread?" she asked in broken English, poking it with her fork. "Cornbread, ma'am," replied Sergeant Evelyn Reed, the mess hall supervisor, with obvious pride. "Fresh baked this morning with real butter and honey." Around the dining hall, 50 German women prisoners examined the unfamiliar food, with expressions ranging from curiosity to disdain. Most had been captured during the Allied advance through France and transferred to American custody just a month earlier. "Corn is animal feed," declared Liesel, a former restaurant owner from Hamburg. "In Germany, we feed corn to livestock, not people." Several women laughed at the observation, and Anja felt emboldened by their support. As someone who had worked in her family's prestigious bakery before the war, she considered herself an authority on proper bread. "Sergeant Reed," Anja said, loudly enough for others to hear, "in Germany, we have real bread. Dark rye, wheat, sourdough, pumpernickel. This cornbread is peasant food." Before we go any further, if you want to hear more incredible untold stories from history, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. I love hearing how far these forgotten truths can travel. Now back to the story. The American sergeant's expression did not change, though something flickered in her eyes. Not anger, but something like amusement mixed with patience. "Well, ma'am, I reckon you don't have to eat it if you don't want to, but I'd suggest giving it a try before deciding. Southern cornbread's been feeding American families for generations." Anja pushed the cornbread to the edge of her plate, focusing instead on the other items: roast pork, collard greens, and mashed potatoes, that were actually quite good. Around her, most German women did the same, leaving the golden wedges untouched, while quietly mocking American culinary ignorance. "Can you imagine," whispered Sabine, sitting beside Anja, "a country so backward they make bread from animal feed and expect civilized people to eat it?" But as the meal progressed, Anja noticed something curious. A few German women, the younger ones, perhaps less attached to rigid food prejudices, had tentatively tasted the cornbread. Their expressions transformed from skepticism to surprise, and one woman, Hannah, was actually eating a second piece. "Hannah," Anja called across the table in German, "you're actually eating that." Hannah looked up, almost embarrassed. "It's actually quite good, sweet, but good. Nothing like I expected." "It's corn," Liesel insisted. "Pig food." "Then the Americans make very tasty pig food," Hannah replied, reaching for a third piece. The mess hall emptied. Anja glanced back at her plate, where the untouched cornbread sat, still warm and smelling sweetly of butter and honey. Pride had prevented her from tasting it, but curiosity whispered that perhaps, just perhaps, her assumptions about American food were as wrong as her assumptions about American brutality had been. The question was whether she was brave enough to challenge her own prejudices. The following morning brought another confrontation with the offensive yellow bread. This time, it appeared at breakfast alongside eggs, bacon, and grits, another American food that looked like wallpaper paste and seemed equally inedible to German palates. "More corn," Liesel announced with dramatic disgust, loud enough for Sergeant Reed to hear. "Do Americans eat nothing but animal feed?" But Anja noticed something had changed overnight. More German women were actually trying the cornbread, and their reaction suggested the food wasn't quite the culinary disaster she had proclaimed. Hannah was teaching others to add extra butter and honey, creating converts with each demonstration. "Anja," said Sabine quietly, "I tried it this morning. You should taste it before judging. I don't need to taste pig food to know it's unsuitable for human consumption. Even as she spoke, Anya's stomach betrayed her. The aroma of warm cornbread with butter was undeniably appealing, and she had been hungry for months before capture. The generous American portions were helping her regain weight, but pride was preventing her from accepting their most distinctive offering. That afternoon, during the daily orientation session, Captain Eleanor Vance addressed the food situation directly. "Ladies, I understand cornbread is unfamiliar to you. In Germany, corn is primarily animal feed. But in America, especially in the South, cornbread is a staple food that families have cherished for centuries." She gestured to a map showing American corn production. "Corn is our most abundant crop. We've developed hundreds of ways to prepare it for human consumption. Cornbread, grits, cornmeal mush, succotash. What you consider animal feed, we consider nutritious and delicious." "But why not wheat bread?" asked Anja, her baker's pride demanding answers. "Surely America has wheat." "We do, and you'll get wheat bread too, but cornbread is part of our culture, and frankly, it's more nutritious than white wheat bread, higher in vitamins and minerals." After the session, Sergeant Reed approached Anya directly. "Mrs. Schmidt, I hear you were a professional baker in Germany." "Yes, my family owned Schmidt's Bakery in Berlin for 3 generations." "Well, ma'am, I'd like to invite you to visit our kitchen tomorrow, show you how we make cornbread properly. Maybe you'll understand it better if you see the process." The invitation was clever, appealing to Anya's professional pride while offering a face-saving way to learn about the despised food. She hesitated, then nodded. "I will come, but I make no promises about eating it." "Fair enough, ma'am, fair enough." That evening, Anya lay in her bunk, listening to other women discuss the day's meals. The conversation had shifted from mockery to grudging appreciation. "The cornbread with the bean soup was actually quite good," admitted someone. "I asked for a second piece at dinner," confessed another voice. "Did anyone else notice we're gaining weight?" asked Sabine. "After months of rationing in Germany, the American portions are substantial." Anya touched her own stomach, feeling the small but noticeable difference a month of American food had made. She had been rail thin when captured, as most German civilians were by war's end. The abundant American food, even the despised cornbread, was restoring her health, whether she admitted it or not. The question now wasn't whether American food was adequate. It was whether her pride would prevent her from admitting that the backward Americans might know something about cuisine that sophisticated Germans had overlooked. The camp kitchen at dawn was a revelation. Anya had expected a utilitarian space focused on efficiency over quality, but instead she found a professionally organized facility that would have impressed her father, the master baker. "Welcome to my domain," Sergeant Reed said with obvious pride, gesturing around the spotless kitchen. "We prepare 3 meals daily for 300 prisoners and 90 staff members. Everything's made fresh." Anya studied the setup with a professional eye. Large capacity ovens, separate preparation tables, organized ingredient storage, and equipment that exceeded what her family's bakery had possessed even before the war. "This is impressive," she admitted reluctantly. "Thank you, ma'am. Now, let me show you how we make proper Southern cornbread." Reed assembled ingredients with practiced efficiency. Cornmeal, flour, eggs, milk, butter, baking powder, and a touch of sugar. Anya watched carefully, her baker's instincts analyzing proportions and techniques. "The key," Reed explained, "is using both cornmeal and flour. Pure cornmeal makes it too crumbly. The combination gives you structure with that distinctive corn flavor. And you add sugar, just a touch. Some folks make it savory, some make it sweet. I prefer somewhere in between." Reed poured batter into a well-buttered iron skillet. "The cast iron is crucial, gives you that crispy golden crust." As the cornbread baked, the kitchen filled with an aroma that made Anja's mouth water despite her prejudices. She watched through the oven window as the batter transformed into golden perfection. "Timing is everything," Reed continued. 20 minutes at 400 degrees. Come out too early and it's gummy. Too late and it's dry. When the timer chimed, Reed removed a perfect pan of cornbread. Golden top, crispy edges, and that distinctive aroma Anja had been smelling for weeks without tasting. "Now, Mrs. Schmidt, I want you to try this while it's hot, with butter and honey, the way it's meant to be eaten." Reed cut a generous wedge, slathered it with butter that melted into the warm bread, and drizzled honey across the top. She handed the plate to Anja with a challenge in her eyes. "Judge it as a baker, ma'am, not as a German who thinks corn is only for animals." Anja stared at the steaming cornbread, butter pooling in its crevices, honey glistening on top. Every instinct told her to refuse on principle, but her professional curiosity and honest hunger overrode pride. She took a small bite. The texture surprised her first. Tender but substantial, with a slight crumble that dissolved on her tongue. The corn flavor was subtle, not overwhelming, complemented perfectly by the butter's richness and honey's sweetness. The crispy edges provided contrast to the soft interior. It was, objectively speaking, delicious. "Well?" Reed asked, though her expression suggested she already knew the answer. "It's..." Anja struggled to reconcile her prejudice with reality. "It's actually quite good. Different from German bread, but good." Reed smiled broadly. "Ma'am, I think you just learned something important about keeping an open mind." As Anja finished the piece and accepted a second, she realized the lesson extended beyond food. She had been wrong about cornbread, just as she had been wrong about American treatment of prisoners, wrong about American cultural sophistication, and probably wrong about many other assumptions she had carried into captivity. The question now was how many other Germans would swallow their pride long enough to discover the same truth. Word spread quickly through Camp Alva that Anja Schmidt, the proud Berlin baker who mocked American cornbread loudest, had not only tried it, but returned from the kitchen praising Sergeant Reed's recipe. By lunchtime, the dining hall buzzed with German women arguing about cultural superiority and culinary prejudice. "Anja, you've betrayed German standards," Liesel declared dramatically. "Next, you'll be saying American beer is superior to German." "I'm saying nothing about beer," Anja replied calmly, buttering her third piece of cornbread that day. "I'm saying that dismissing food without tasting it is foolish, and I was foolish." Around them, other women watched this exchange with interest. Anja's conversion carried weight because of her professional credentials. If a trained baker admitted American cornbread was good, perhaps the mockery had been premature. "It's the honey and butter that make it tolerable," insisted Sabine, trying to save German pride. "The bread itself is still inferior." "Actually," said Hannah, who had been won over days earlier, "I tried it plain this morning, still good. Different texture than rye, but good in its own way." The debate continued throughout the day, but Anja noticed a shift in behavior even among the most resistant women. At dinner, fewer golden wedges were left untouched on plates. By week's end, the kitchen had to increase cornbread production to meet demand. "Mrs. Schmidt," Captain Vance said during a private conversation, "Sergeant Reed tells me you've become quite the cornbread advocate. I simply admitted I was wrong to judge without knowledge, Captain. As a professional baker, I should have known better. Would you be interested in helping us establish a baking program, teaching German bread-making techniques to our staff while learning more American recipes?" The offer surprised Anja. "You want a German prisoner to teach your staff? I want a skilled baker to share knowledge. Your nationality matters less than your expertise." 2 weeks later, Anja stood before a mixed group of American staff and German prisoners, demonstrating proper rye bread technique, while Sergeant Reed prepared to teach Southern biscuits. The cultural exchange was unprecedented, former enemies learning from each other in a prison camp kitchen. The key to good rye, Anja explained in improving English, is patience. The dough needs time to develop flavor. Unlike wheat, you cannot rush rye. Same with cornbread, Reed added. Respect the ingredients, understand their nature, and the food respects you back. As German rye bread and American cornbread emerged from ovens side by side, Anja realized something profound. Food had become a bridge where politics and prejudice had built walls. Breaking bread together, whether rye or corn, created common ground that transcended wartime divisions. That evening, the mess hall served both German rye and American cornbread with dinner. Prisoners and staff alike took samples of both, comparing notes and expressing appreciation for unfamiliar flavors. "Anya," said Liesel, finally trying the cornbread after weeks of resistance. "I hate to admit this, but it's actually quite good." "I know," Anja replied with a smile. "That's what I've been trying to tell you." As she watched German women eagerly requesting seconds of the cornbread they had mocked just weeks earlier, Anja understood that she had witnessed a small miracle. The transformation of prejudice into appreciation through the simple act of keeping an open mind and an honest palate. The Americans had defeated Germany militarily, but they were winning the peace through something more powerful than weapons: the patient demonstration that their culture, their food, and their values deserved respect rather than mockery. 3 months after her arrival at Camp Alva, Anja received a letter through international aid channels that would force her to confront difficult truths about her homeland. Her sister Ursula wrote from occupied Berlin, describing conditions that made prison camp life seem luxurious by comparison. "We stand in bread lines for hours," Ursula wrote. "Yesterday's ration was 180 grams of black bread mixed with sawdust to stretch the flour. No butter, no meat, no vegetables. People are starving, while occupying forces eat well." Anya read the letter while eating lunch in the mess hall, a meal that included fried chicken, cornbread, green beans, and apple pie. The contrast was devastating. She was a prisoner eating better than free German civilians. "Bad news?" asked Sabine, noting Anja's expression. "My sister. She's hungry in Berlin while I'm gaining weight in Alabama." Anja pushed her plate away, suddenly unable to eat. Sergeant Reed noticed the distress and approached quietly. "Mrs. Schmidt, is everything all right? My family is starving in Germany, while you feed prisoners like honored guests. Nothing about this is all right." Reed sat down across from Anya, her expression sympathetic. "Ma'am, I understand the guilt, but punishing yourself doesn't help your family. Then what does? Surviving, getting stronger, learning skills that might help rebuild Germany someday." Reed paused. "And maybe understanding that the war's outcome wasn't just about military defeat. It was about which system takes better care of its people." The statement hung in the air like an indictment. Anya had been raised to believe German culture was superior, German organization more efficient, German civilization more advanced. Yet here she sat, a German prisoner eating abundant American food, while German civilians starved under a system that had promised greatness. That afternoon, Anja made a decision that would have seemed treasonous months earlier. She requested permission to write to her sister with advice about applying for immigration to America. "Captain Vance," she said during their meeting, "I want to help my family leave Germany. Is that possible?" "Under certain circumstances, yes. Family reunification is being considered for prisoners who demonstrate good conduct and integration potential." I'll do whatever is necessary. My sister has 3 children. They need to eat. Over the following weeks, Anya threw herself into the cultural exchange program with renewed purpose. She taught German baking techniques while learning American recipes. She improved her English through intensive study. She demonstrated the cooperation and adaptability that might help bring her family to safety. "You're working hard," observed Reed during one of their now regular kitchen collaborations. "I'm working for my family's future." Anya paused, measuring her words carefully, and maybe admitting that the country that defeated us understands some things better than we did. "Like cornbread?" Reed asked with a slight smile. "Like taking care of people. Like abundance instead of rationing. Like treating even prisoners with dignity." Anya pulled fresh cornbread from the oven. She had learned to make it as well as any Southern cook. "I mocked this bread because it wasn't German. But now I understand it represents something we lost in Germany. The idea that there's enough for everyone, that we don't have to fight over scraps." 6 months later, Anya stood in the camp's visiting area, embracing her sister, Ursula, and her 3 hungry nieces who had just arrived from Berlin. The children stared wide-eyed at the mess hall, where dinner included, among many other things, golden wedges of cornbread with butter and honey. "What is that yellow bread?" asked the youngest, echoing Anja's own first question. "That," Anja replied, cutting generous portions for each child, "is American cornbread. I used to think it was peasant food, but I was wrong about many things. Try it. You'll love it." As she watched her nieces devour the cornbread with the desperate hunger of children who had known real starvation, Anja understood that her journey from mockery to appreciation had been about more than just food. It had been about learning that cultural pride, left unchecked, blinds you to truths that might save your life and your family. 1 year after her first taste of cornbread, Anja stood in a newly established bakery classroom at Camp Alva, teaching a mixed group of American staff and German prisoners the art of traditional German baking. On the counter beside her sat 2 loaves, a dark German rye, and a golden pan of cornbread, symbols of the cultural bridge she had helped build. "Today," she announced in confident English, "we combine techniques, German precision with American abundance. We make what I call friendship bread. Half wheat, half cornmeal, German method, American ingredients." Captain Vance observed from the doorway, taking notes for a report she would submit to the War Department about successful integration programs. The baking exchange had become Alva's most popular activity, with waiting lists for both prisoners and staff who wanted to learn. Mrs. Schmidt called Private Clara Esposito, a young cook from Florida. "Why do you mix the cornmeal so gently? We usually stir it vigorously." "Because cornmeal is delicate," Anya explained, demonstrating her technique. "Treat it rough, and the bread becomes tough. A gentle touch makes a tender crumb." Sergeant Reed, now Anja's co-instructor and unlikely friend, added her own wisdom. "Same principle applies to people, actually. A gentle approach usually works better than force." The statement carried layers of meaning that were not lost on anyone present. The entire baking program had become a metaphor for the camp's philosophy, that former enemies could learn from each other if treated with respect rather than hostility. As the experimental loaves baked, filling the room with aromas that blended German and American traditions, Anya reflected on how far she had traveled from the proud baker who had mocked cornbread as pig food. "Anja," said Sabine, who joined the program after her own conversion, "have you heard about the Agriculture Department's proposal?" "What proposal?" "They want to send several prisoners to work on local farms, teaching German agricultural techniques while learning American methods. You've been recommended." The opportunity represented something unprecedented. enemy prisoners working alongside American civilians, sharing knowledge instead of hostility. But it also meant leaving the safety of camp, facing Americans who might harbor more hatred than the military staff. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," Anja admitted. "You weren't ready to try cornbread either," Sabine reminded her. "But you did, and look what happened." That evening, Anja walked the camp perimeter, wrestling with her decision. Through the fence, she could see Alabama farmland stretching to the horizon, fields that could benefit from German crop rotation techniques, just as German agriculture could learn from American mechanization. Mrs. Schmidt, Captain Vance had followed her outside. "I wanted to discuss the farming program before you make your decision." "I'm concerned about civilian reaction, Captain. Military staff have been kind, but ordinary Americans who lost sons to German soldiers might not welcome enemy prisoners." "That's a valid concern, but I believe you have a gift for changing minds, Anja. You did it with cornbread. You're doing it in the bakery. Maybe you can do it on farms, too. By teaching people that Germans aren't monsters. By teaching people that former enemies can become valuable neighbors if given the chance." The timer in the bakery chimed, signaling that the experimental friendship bread was ready. They walked back together, arriving as Reed pulled the loaves from the oven, golden crusts with the distinctive texture of combined traditions. "Perfect," Reed announced, cutting slices for everyone present. "German structure, American flavor, best of both worlds." As Anja tasted the bread that represented her own transformation, she realized that Captain Vance was right. She had spent a year building bridges in the camp kitchen. Perhaps it was time to take those bridges beyond the fence. "Captain," she said, making her decision, "I'll join the farming program, but I have one condition." "What's that?" "I want to bring cornbread recipes to share with the farm families. Show them that prisoners appreciate American culture as much as we hope they'll appreciate German techniques." Vance smiled. "Mrs. Schmidt, I think that's exactly the right approach." 3 months later, Anja stood in the kitchen of the Caldwell family farm outside Utah, teaching Mrs. Laura Caldwell how to make proper German apple strudel, while a pan of cornbread cooled on the counter, her calling card for winning over skeptical civilians. "The dough must be stretched thin as paper," Anja demonstrated, pulling the pastry across the floured table. "You should be able to read a newspaper through it." Mrs. Caldwell watched with the careful attention of someone who had initially opposed having a German prisoner on her property, but had been won over by Anja's combination of expertise and humility. "Anja, I have to admit something," Mrs. Caldwell said. "When Captain Vance first suggested this program, I was furious. My nephew died at Normandy. The last thing I wanted was a German woman in my kitchen." "What changed your mind?" "That cornbread you brought the first day. You said, 'Mrs. Caldwell, I used to think this was pig food. I was wrong about cornbread, and probably wrong about many Americans, too.' That honesty meant something." Over the months, Anja had visited 6 farms, teaching German techniques while learning American agricultural methods. Each visit followed the same pattern. Initial suspicion dissolved by her willingness to admit past prejudices and appreciation for American culture. "The cornbread has become my ambassador," Anja told Sergeant Reed during one of their regular check-ins. "I tell them I mocked it until I tried it, and they understand that judgment without knowledge is foolish." "You're not just teaching farming, Anja, you're teaching reconciliation." The farming program expanded rapidly as word spread about the German baker who loves cornbread. Local newspapers ran stories about cultural exchange, and several farm families requested German prisoners to help with the harvest while teaching traditional techniques. But success brought complications. Not everyone approved of fraternizing with former enemies, and Anja faced hostility from civilians who could not forgive German aggression. "You shouldn't be here," said Mr. Arthur Finch, confronting Anja at the Utah General Store. "My son died fighting your people. You should be in prison, not shopping alongside decent Americans." The store fell silent as other customers watched the confrontation. Anja stood quietly, understanding his pain but unsure how to respond. "Mr. Finch," said Mrs. Caldwell, stepping forward, "this woman has taught my family techniques that improved our harvest by nearly a quarter. She's working hard, respecting our culture, and trying to make amends for a war she didn't start. She's still German, and I'm still American with a dead nephew. But I've learned that holding on to hatred hurts me more than it hurts her. Maybe you should try her cornbread. Seems to help with perspective." The tension diffused slowly, but Mr. Finch left without another word. Anja stood shaking, reminded that reconciliation was a long process that could not be rushed. That evening, she returned to camp exhausted and discouraged. Captain Vance found her in the bakery, seeking comfort in the familiar routine of making bread. "Bad day?" Vance asked. "Mr. Finch is right to hate me. I'm German. His son died because of Germany. His son died because of war, Anja, and you're helping end that cycle of hatred by building bridges instead of walls. Through cornbread, through whatever works, food, farming, honest conversation, you're proving that former enemies can become contributors to society if given the chance." 6 months later, Mr. Finch appeared at the Caldwell farm where Anja was teaching crop rotation techniques. He stood awkwardly at the edge of the field until Mrs. Caldwell noticed and invited him closer. "Mr. Finch," Anja said quietly, "I understand if you need me to leave." "No, ma'am. I came to apologize for the store incident." He paused, clearly struggling. "My wife made me taste that cornbread you left at the church social. She said you told folks you used to think it was pig food until you tried it with an open mind." "That's true, sir." "Well, I figured if you could admit you were wrong about cornbread, maybe I could admit I was wrong about lumping all Germans together." He extended his hand. "I'm still grieving my son, but that's not your fault." As Anja shook his hand, she understood that reconciliation happened one person at a time, one admission at a time, one shared meal at a time. 6 years after arriving at Camp Alva, Anja stood in her own bakery in downtown Utah, Alabama, a small shop that had become a symbol of post-war reconciliation. The sign above the door read, "Schmidt's American Bakery, German Tradition, Southern Heart," and the display window showcased both traditional German rye and her now famous cornbread variations. "Mrs. Schmidt," called young Leo Caldwell, rushing in after school, "Ma says she needs 2 loaves of your honey cornbread for the church social." "Coming right up, Leo." Anja wrapped the golden loaves with practiced efficiency, adding an extra piece. "This one's for you. Growing boys need good food." The shop had been Captain Vance's idea, a way to demonstrate that former prisoners could successfully integrate into American communities. The town council had debated for months before approving the business license. But Anja's reputation as the German baker who loved cornbread had won enough supporters to tip the balance. Her sister Ursula worked alongside her now, managing the front while Anja handled baking. The 3 nieces attended Utah High School, speaking English with Southern accents that made Anja smile. They were becoming American while maintaining German heritage, a balance Anja herself had learned through trial and error. "Anja," Ursula called from the front, "Mrs. Reed is here." Sergeant Reed, now retired Evelyn Reed, had become Anja's business partner and closest friend. Their collaboration continued the cultural exchange that had begun in the camp kitchen years earlier. "Evelyn," Anja greeted her warmly, "the new recipe is ready. German chocolate cake with Alabama mud frosting." "Another fusion masterpiece," Evelyn laughed. Girl, you're going to put regular bakeries out of business." As they sampled the experimental cake, Captain Vance arrived, also retired, but working for the State Department's Immigrant Integration Program. She had requested this meeting to discuss something important. "Anja, Evelyn, I have news. The State Department wants to document your story for a report on successful post-war reconciliation programs. They're particularly interested in how food became a bridge between cultures. Because of cornbread?" Anja asked with a smile. "Because of your willingness to admit you were wrong, to learn from former enemies, and to build something new from combined traditions." That evening, Anja hosted a dinner at the bakery for the people who had shaped her American journey. The menu perfectly captured her transformation: German sauerbraten with southern collard greens, potato dumplings alongside cornbread dressing, and for dessert, her fusion chocolate cake. Mr. Finch attended, having become one of her regular customers and a vocal supporter of immigrant integration. The Caldwell family sat beside Anja's sister and nieces, relationships that transcended wartime divisions. American staff from Camp Alva mingled with former prisoners who had chosen to remain in Alabama, building lives in the country that had defeated theirs. "Speech," called someone as dessert was served. Anja stood reluctantly, uncomfortable with the tension but understanding the moment's significance. 6 years ago, I arrived in Alabama, convinced Americans were barbarians who fed corn to people like it was pig food. I mocked your cornbread without tasting it, just as I believed propaganda without questioning it." She paused, looking around at faces that had become family. Then Sergeant Reed, Evelyn, invited me to taste what I had been mocking. That single bite of cornbread taught me more about keeping an open mind than any lecture could have. It taught me that judgment without knowledge is foolish, that cultural pride can blind you to truth, and that former enemies can become family if someone is brave enough to offer understanding instead of hatred. Evelyn raised her glass. "To cornbread, the unlikely ambassador of peace." "To cornbread," everyone echoed, laughing. Later, as Anja cleaned up with her sister's help, Ursula asked the question that still haunted them both. "Do you ever regret staying in America instead of returning to Germany?" Anja thought about the girl who had arrived trembling with fear, expecting brutality and finding kindness. She thought about mocking cornbread until humility taught her better. She thought about building bridges through bread and proving that former enemies could become valued neighbors. "Never," she replied honestly. "Germany was my birthplace, but America became my home the day I admitted I was wrong about cornbread. Everything else followed from that simple act of keeping an open mind and an honest palate." A decade later, Schmidt's American Bakery had expanded to 3 locations across Alabama. Anja's nieces had graduated college. Her fusion recipes appeared in Dixie Home magazine, and her story was taught in schools as an example of successful post-war integration. But the original Utah location remained her favorite. And every morning she still baked the same 2 items that symbolized her journey: traditional German rye bread and southern cornbread, sitting side by side in the window, proving that the best way to end hatred was to admit you were wrong, taste what you had been mocking, and build something new from combined traditions. The girl who laughed at cornbread had learned to love it, and in doing so had learned to love the country that made it, one honest bite at a time. Thank you for following this story to the end. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to join us in more stories like this. If you want to watch another story, click the video on screen. I promise you'll love it.